The Unwanted, Chapter 14. Every day at 5 in the morning, before any activity could begin, the adults in my neighborhood were required to come out of their homes and salute the flag, while a loudspeaker played the national anthem. Afterward, the communists held meetings at different houses in the vicinity. The agenda at these gatherings usually involved the teachings of Karl Marx, or the reading of communist poetry, or the examination of each individual's behavior toward communism. Sometimes, instead of the usual new education meetings, the town citizens formed groups, walking from door to door to pick up trash until every street in town was clean. Today, it had been decided, would be the investigation day, and since she was the newest person in town, my mother was the target of a group discussion. In front of a crowd full of sleepy faces, my mother was directed to speak about herself, not as a form of self-introduction, but in a confession of her past sins against the Communist Party and the new government. Standing alone on stage with a microphone in her hand, my mother rushed through the major events of her life, trying to convey enough sincerity to keep herself out of trouble. She acknowledged her guilt and ignorance during the Republican era and praised the enlightened attitudes she had since learned. Her communist vocabulary had improved a great deal through her encounters with Mr. Trent, and she incorporated his words into her speech, maintaining her eye contact with everyone except Lum. He sat among a group of men acting as inconspicuous as possible. When my mother had finished, the community leader stepped up to the podium. Unlike Mr. Trent, who had earned his position through spying, the new leader was a high-ranking officer in the Viet Cong's military. He was in his early 50s, with thin, silver hair and a catchy smile. He had spent the past 10 years of his life in Trang Sung Mountains trekking the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Rumors had it that he was now waiting to be reunited with his wife and children. Taking the microphone in his hand, he said, "Thank you, Miss Kuhan. What a story. Does anyone care to give any feedback? It is time for some constructive criticism, so without further ado, let's start. May I remind you that each time anyone among you makes a statement, he or she will earn a point toward community work." A man stood up. My mother recognized him as one of her regular customers at her bank during her pre-revolutionary days. A chill shot through her, since his appearance conjured up in her mind the hundreds of angry customers who had confronted her only a short time ago. As for the man, earning up to 30 points would exempt him from a day of volunteer work in the jungle. However, he also understood my mother's capacity to hurt him through her knowledge of his past business affairs. He cleared his throat and said, "It was a sincere story told from the heart, but are you leaving out any details? I want to know more about your personal life. Do you have any children, and how many? Have you been married?" The communist leader looked at my mother, waiting for her reply. "Well, to tell the truth," my mother began, mechanically touching her stomach through her blouse, "I have never been married. I have 2 sons and a new child on the way." "Tell us about your sons," a voice said. "It belonged to a woman who lived in a farm a few blocks away from my house. She was the wife of the town butcher." "What do you want to know about my sons?" my mother said. "They are still very young." The butcher's wife stood, looking up and down at my mother. Then she blurted out, "I've been watching you since you moved into this neighborhood. I don't need you to tell me how old your children are. What I want to know is the nature of their ethnicity. Are they half-breeds or not? Because if they are, it is an issue to us." "Yes, they are." My mother swallowed. "Then how did you get these children? Through a catalog?" "I got them the same way you got your children, through intercourse, of course." My mother's answer stirred up a round of laughter in the crowd. The community leader warned my mother, "Behave yourself, lady. This isn't a nightclub." The butcher's wife turned bright red, but was not giving up. Under the imperialist government, she said fervently. There are two possible ways for a person to have had mixed blood children: through prostitution or through adoption. You have admitted earlier that was how you got them, so you must be a hooker. She ended triumphantly, looking around the audience for affirmation. My mother swallowed again. She knew at that moment she had to make up her mind about her past status before these strangers. They wanted to label her so that later they could justify any action taken against her. What was the lesser of two evils she could admit to? Being a lowly prostitute or an arrogant capitalist? To the new regime, capitalism was considered the higher crime. 15 seconds dragged by before she could speak. Finally, with the crowd's full attention, my mother nodded in agreement. Yes, I was, she said. A prostitute is exactly what I was, and I am utterly ashamed of it. If you had any shame, the butcher's wife criticized, you wouldn't admit it in front of everybody. I think you would find a way to be rid of the... In fact, you could very well get an abortion right now if you wanted to. Who are you? The leader asked the woman. Give me your name so I can give you a point. From the stage, my mother spoke into the microphone as she pointed her finger into the crowd. If you ask the man over there, you'll find out that he is responsible for the baby inside me. It was not from a foreigner's seed, and I was not getting paid, sleeping with him. Can I then keep this child? No one answered her. However, the crowd's attention turned to Lum. Come up here and tell us your story, the leader said to Lum.